Good Tuesday to everybody in COM 731. Welcome to week 6. Kaboom. How's everybody doing? How you hanging in there? You okay? Hang on. Delicious. What do we have here? Sam A. Baker, a very nice state park in the wonderful state of Missouri where I live. So now, much better. I'm your sufficiently caffeinated communication instructor. Okay, so for this week, we are nearing the end of our time in Tapscott and Williams macroeconomics, right? And we're going to take a deeper dive this week into some of the changes, impacts, changes in media that the new technology is bringing. So you will read chapters 11 through 15, okay? And, right out of the gate, chapter 11, the title of it is The Demise of the Newspaper and the Rise of the New News. One of the things I want you to be watching out for and thinking about as you read this particular chapter and this section of this chapter is, just because something's happening doesn't mean it's a good thing or doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And the question I'd like you to have in your mind, and albeit that this book, given the speed at which this change is occurring, is dated, is this a good thing? One of the trends that we're seeing where news is concerned is the rise of what is now being called the non-expert expert. That is, people who are adept at getting and holding the attention of the audience through their techniques of presentation, personality, but are not necessarily expert in the information and or the process that they're communicating. And in fact, I read a fascinating paper by a student, I think it was last year, almost maybe a year and a half ago, about the spectrum of non-expert experts concerning dating and relationship advice for men and women by men and women influencers, personalities on social media platforms. And in this paper, I think the author, he focused specifically on YouTube, and whether or not their recommendation of, this is how you date, and this is how you behave, and this is what to expect from a man, or this is what I expect from a woman, in any way lined up with established data about behaviors and productive responses by the opposite sex, one to another. And it was fascinating. It was a fascinating study. So for good or bad, the rise of the non-expert expert is here. So think about that as you're reading, especially when you get to the section on the dark side. This is chapter 11. Now, when you move into chapter 12, you're going to have a chance to sort of think about the future of music, which for artists, producers of music, musicians, those who are trying to make their living through the production of music, the coming of internet, really the ability to move an audio file around, an MP3 file around from one place to another, and this was the birth of podcasting, it's been a mixed blessing. On the one hand, it's opened up access to audience, but on the other hand, thanks significantly to the recording industry's sort of pivot, people aren't buying records, 8-track tapes, or CDs. So record companies are making songs available as individual units rather than albums as packaged items. People are, now the expectation in the market is that you should be able to get the songs that you like for a very, very low price point, 79 cents, 99 cents. And as such, musicians now, although they have an access to a larger audience, are having a hard time making a living because they're selling their songs for less than a child would a glass of lemonade, or that, the market is sort of this price point They just can't get much more in the way of return. And that sort of mixed blessing that that's brought. And it's interesting. You can see the there's some parts of this text where I think, okay, you're onto something, and some parts where I think you're not. I think in the music section in chapter 12, this was one of the areas in which Tapscott and Williams, your authors, were onto something in which they write. This says, as we've advocated for many years, there's one obvious solution. Music should stop being a product that you buy and instead being a service that you subscribe to. Okay, well, that's here. Whether it's Spotify or iTunes or Amazon, that's the direction that it's going. Now, there's still one step, in there that makes it hard for musicians to make a living, and that is, at least through Amazon. I'm not a Spotify user, and I'm not an Apple user, so I don't have iTunes. That through Amazon you can download the song. You pay for the subscription service, and then you can download the song and capture that MP3 and then start moving it around. So in effect, I could own or take control of limitless numbers of songs for a very, very low fee. That is a subscriber fee. And how much this is going back to the musician. Okay, don't know. Okay, into chapter 14, you're going to read about some of Tapscott and Williams' thoughts concerning the potential for government to cooperate with industry and be an agent for change. And I think this is I don't disagree that there's potential here, but I think the direction that it has gone has not been a productive one for the public at large. The more significant cooperation between government and tech has been one that provides government with the means by which to intrude into the lives of the citizens and monitor the lives of the citizens, and in some instances to punish the citizens with, say, shadow banning or revoking of their ability, the citizens, to access funds. I'm thinking of the strike by the Canadian truckers over the COVID vaccine mandate, and they were not working, and they were not driving, and they were parking their trucks in Toronto in protest, and they had set up a GoFundMe account to provide revenue for the truckers' families who were not getting any money because the truckers weren't working. And the GoFundMe was tremendously successful. It raised millions of dollars. And at the urging of the Canadian government, GoFundMe froze access to those funds. That is, the truckers didn't get them. Right? Is this the direction that we want this to go? Okay. And then finally, in chapter 15, you're going to get the opportunity to sort of contemplate the rise of regulation, or the types of regulation on the internet, and what's best, and specifically the rise of the citizen regulator, and that's you and me. So is the internet best policed by those who use it? And if you use YouTube, you know that you can report a video and you say, hey, this is problematic. Or does that subject creators to the whim of the mob, which is not always logical, and not always accurate, and not always honest? And at the heart of this, at this question of regulation, if you're not familiar with this as a media scholar, communication scholar, you need to be, is the question of a piece of legislation referred to as Section 230. And let me say a little bit about that, because this is really at the heart of what should or shouldn't, or can or can't, be applied by regulation for the internet. So back in the 90s, when the internet was just starting to grow, I mean, I was there at the birth of the internet. I was using the World Wide Web before there were widely available search engines. So if you wanted to go to a particular website, and overwhelmingly most of them were just text, there wasn't images. You had to know the URL. That is the address up there, HTTP colon slash slash, and HTTP stands for Hypertext Protocol. You had to know that URL, and we used to generate. Some of us would just write it out. Some of us would type it in and then print out a new page. We would generate these phone books, essentially, internet books, website books, and carry them around and exchange pages with each other, saying, "Oh, hey, this is really interesting website." And most of the websites, this is the early '90s, most of the websites were given over to scholarly endeavors. Some were just, fun and goofy. Some of the early ones were focused on things like cooking and recipes. Okay. So if you wanted to know where they were, if you wanted to know how to get there, you had to have the address. There wasn't a search engine out there. But the idea was to have a free and open exchange of information. Well, one of the problems that was identified early on and came in the form of a question is, who's responsible for what gets put on a web page? If something is placed on a web page that's inaccurate, or worse, that harms someone, let's say it's libelous, or is it slander? Okay, it's in print and it's inaccurate and it harms their reputation, and this becomes libel. Who's responsible for that? And the question was raised, what is a website? And we would say now, so for instance, a social media application. Is it a publisher, like in the case of a newspaper, or is it a platform, like in the case of let's stay with the analogy of newspaper, like in the case of a paper producer, that is a company that supplies the big, huge rolls of paper to the newspaper company. And the paper supplier, they're not responsible for what sort of stories the newspaper puts on the paper when they spray them with ink. That's not what they do. They just hand over the paper. They're just providing the platform. It's the publisher, the newspaper, that decides which words go on there and then get published. And in U.S. law, the publisher is responsible for any harm done to any individual. Along comes the internet and the World Wide Web. So you set up a website that you allow people to start adding content into. Is that website, and you own it, all right? You might even be generating revenue from it. Okay, you have an ad model, whether you're just asking for donations or there's ads being done. And a whole bunch of people come in and put content on. And let's say some of that content harms someone's reputation, or it harms their business. It does damage to their reputation, which causes them to lose their job. Who's responsible? Is the platform, let's say YouTube, that allowed that stuff to be put on, or is the individual that put it on? And YouTube is just like the paper producer, like, hey, we just provide the platform like the paper producer provides the paper for the newspaper to print on. We don't print. So there's a law passed in the early 90s, called Section 230, that said, and this was from a bill, okay? So it was like Bill 47, United States Congress, USC, Section 230, that said platforms on the internet, social media platforms, websites, are like the paper providers. They're not publishers. So they can't be held responsible for what goes on there. Okay, fine. But what happens when platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Google, okay, Google's not really a platform, but it's a search engine. What happens when they start putting rules in place? So Twitter, Instagram, and they start saying, we're going to take down certain content because it violates our policies, and we're going to just leave certain content up. So content that questions the validity, the efficacy of, say, the COVID vaccine, the necessity, or even questions the relationship between the pharmaceutical companies and governments. Should that be allowed to stay up, or should it be taken down? And if there's some sort of editorial decision, this is going to be allowed, this is not going to be allowed, doesn't that make the platform a producer, an editor, like the newspaper? Because if you have rules in place and you say, we'll allow this, but we won't allow that, it's just like a newspaper. Nobody can just walk into the newspaper and say, oh, what you got there? Big roll of blank paper roll. Yeah, right. I'm just going to go print, and put whatever I want in it in whatever place. And you go ahead and print the rest of the edition and then send out the paper, send out the magazine. And the paper goes, oh, okay. No. There's been significant concern that social media companies have been allowed to have the best of both worlds. That is, to benefit from citizen contributors, everybody piling in. Again, let's say YouTube. YouTube benefits from videos that are placed on its platform. How? Because those videos bring views, and those views are then utilized to post ads, and there's a fee charged to the company that produces the ad, and YouTube makes money. So, but YouTube also disallows some content and allows some content, pushes some content down or pushes it out entirely, and pushes some content up or pushes it forward entirely. So they're benefiting from the revenue that comes from, and they're not producing the content. That's what makes it so lucrative. They don't have to chase around and produce the content. They're benefiting from the revenue that comes from millions, maybe billions of producers, but they're not being held accountable for policies that are just like an editorial policy in a newspaper. And so what I want you to do as you read through these 4 chapters this week is ask, is that right? Is that fair? Is that accurate? Okay. So that's going to be your focus for this week. And then, of course, I've got a little interview with Don Tapscott for you to take a look at. And then, of course, there are the questions. Right now, you have turned in your part 1 for your paper, and I will be grading those this week. Okay. Giving you some feedback and getting them back to you. Now, remember, when you get the feedback and you get the grade from me, that since writing is rewriting, you have the opportunity that when you finish the paper, okay, remember this is 1 paper, 2 parts. When you finish the paper, use part 1 as part of finishing the paper. If you make the changes to the paper that I point out, and if you do the things that I ask you to do more of, and you don't do the things that I say don't do this, and your score goes up on the final paper, I will change your grade. I'll raise that. This is just hypothetical, okay? So let's say you get a 75 on part 1 and you get a 95 on part 2. I'll raise the score of part 1 from 75 to 95. I will not lower the score. So let's say you get a 95 on part 1, and I don't know what happens. You fall asleep at your desk and your head collapses into the keys and it's just, and you go and you wake up, oh, good, thanks. I'm glad to be finished with that. And you hit send. Your grade goes down. I won't lower the grade for part 1. Okay. So I'll be doing those this week. Okay. So that gives you some things to focus on for Tapscott and William. And the next video that I'm about to post, we'll talk about the readings and your responses from last week and see if we can't add something to them to enrich your understanding of the material that we're covering in this class. All right. All right, everybody, have a fantastic week, and I will see you on Canvas. Bye-bye.